Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to today's chapel service. I am Walter Johnson. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Chicago Hope Academy, and some of you freshmen have probably never seen me before, and the upperclassmen have probably wondered where I've been. Well, the thing about this pandemic that challenges me the most is the fact that I don't get a chance to see all of you on a regular basis. I have to tell you, I miss that more than anything. So having an opportunity to speak today, it's indeed a pleasure. I wish we were doing it in person, but this is the task in front of us, and so therefore I'll try to do my best sharing a few words to you this afternoon. With this being the start of Black History Month, it's always kind of almost a tradition to start with something from Dr. Martin Luther King. And even though it's been, so many years since his tragic death, the impact of his work is something that we still feel today. And we feel it in terms of progress made and challenges that we still have. We also feel it in terms of his written word and speeches that he gave. And one of the speeches that he gave on this date in 1968 was, I believe it was called the Drum Major Instinct. And actually it wasn't a speech, it was a sermon that he gave at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And this Drum Major Instinct sermon talked a lot about folks who wanted to be seen, who wanted to be in the lead. And it's an instinct that Dr. King said that we all have in us, that we all have this instinct to be noticed, to want to be out front. He described it at one point in his sermon like this, that there is this kind of innate thing that's born in us as children, that when we're born, we cry for attention. And that is part of the drum major instinct. And then we get older and we want to get bigger, better things. We want a house that's nicer than the one next door. We want the best car. He talked about at the time, that people would buy cars that were more than their annual salary, that cost more than their annual salary. And, they could barely eat, but they had this really nice car because they wanted to be seen. They wanted to be out front, this drum major instinct. Now, there's an interesting thing about this speech, this sermon. It was 38 minutes long, and the first 28 minutes, if it wasn't Dr. King, I would suggest that it was very impactful. But the last 10 minutes of this speech, so if you have a chance to Google it or read it, it's really the last 10 minutes where he brings home this point relative to the drum major instinct. However, I take a different stand on what the whole drum major instinct is, and I differ a bit from Dr. King. Dr. King, in those last 10 minutes, talked about, being a drum major for Christ, being a drum major for change, being out front for justice, being out front for those causes that showed that he had a love for humanity. And so I appreciated all of that and really feel like it made sense for the audience he was speaking to at the time. But I'm talking to you today, and I want to make this relevant to you today. This idea of being a drum major. Well, I think we have to really understand what a drum major really is. Drum major, even though they're out front, they have a responsibility for leading the corps. And really, at the end of the day, making sure that all of the people in the band, the marching band, are in the positions they're supposed to be in and are making the moves they're supposed to make on the field. Most importantly, they're responsible for keeping the rhythm and keeping the beat. And so where I want to go with this today, for your edification and for your understanding, is I want to talk about your responsibility, our responsibility for keeping the rhythm and keeping the beat. So if we utilize Dr. King's drum major approach and we apply it to today, I'm less concerned about you as a drum major or me as a drum major wanting to be noticed. I'm more concerned about what you do to lead and how you lead, how you keep the rhythm and how you keep the beat. There are things that happen in our lives that we can either allow us to miss a beat, get off beat, or ultimately misstep, be in the wrong place, and not wind up down the path that God has made for us. But if we are truly following the teachings of Christ, and we understand what our role is in society, and let's start with what our role is in our family, regardless of whether or not we come from a traditional family setting or if we come from a challenged family setting, what's our responsibility in that family? And let's start there. And let's talk about being a drum major there, keeping the beat and keeping the rhythm, keeping things moving forward, keeping the performance positive, keeping things happening in a way that it ultimately leads to applause at the end. Applause at the end. We're going to come back to that. So, what are we doing to make sure that we keep the rhythm, keep the beat? Well, let's back up for a second. If we, in fact, have a responsibility for those around us, or I should say, if we are willing to take responsibility for both ourselves and those around us, starting with our family, we can either be a member of the band and march to somebody else's beat, or we can be the drum major and we can set the tone, set the beat, set the direction, and lead. But it takes sacrifice to do that. It is hard work to be the one that's out front. So even though you're the one that's being seen, and maybe that's something that attracts you, if you are a drum major in your home, if you are a drum major in your classroom, if you're a drum major in your community, if you are going to be the person seen, the person out front, then you have some choices. You can either lead in a direction that ultimately creates a positive result, or you can have everybody moving in the wrong direction, offbeat. And I would argue that our challenge, our real challenge, is figuring out whether or not we truly want to be in the lead. And if we decide to take that step, are we willing to put the work in, make the effort that's going to have all of the people around us in the band taking the right steps, staying on beat, and keeping the rhythm? So that's a whole lot of kind of stuff said that at the end of the day, the real question is, are you willing to take responsibility for what's happening in your life, starting with your family, starting with those around you, in the classroom, in the school setting, in your work life, in your spiritual life. And if you're willing to take the lead and be responsible, people around you will be impacted in a positive way. If you're not willing to take responsibility, if you're not willing to be a leader, then people around you may very well be impacted in a negative way. Do I believe that everyone has the opportunity to have a positive impact? Yes. The problem is it's hard work, and we somehow make you think it's easy. And it's not. I was once told anything worth having is worth working for. I've never been told anything that's worth having will simply be given to you. So one of the things that I figured out early on is I had to take some responsibility for my own life. I had to be a drum major in my own life. I had to keep the beat in my own life before I could even think about leading anybody else or leading anything else. And once I was willing to accept that responsibility, the next thing that came along was I realized it is not easy being the person that's trying to set the tone, keep the rhythm, keep the beat. Not easy. Maybe the hardest job on the field in the marching band is to be that person. But if you decide to do it, the people around you will be impacted in a positive way, and your own life will be fulfilled in a way that maybe you hadn't considered. It is the way to move from 1 yard line to the next, to the next, to the next. But you have to be willing to put in the work. Dr. King gave an amazing number of good speeches and sermons over his lifetime. I think this is an interesting one. Not necessarily saying it's the best or the worst. I think it's an interesting one. But what's most important to me is what is its relevance to who we are today? And I go back to this idea that if you are going to be a drum major, it isn't about being seen or simply about being out front. It's about being a leader, being willing to put in the work to make sure that everyone around you, and yourself included, is in the right space, doing the right thing at the right time, and ultimately making sure that you are doing your part to keep the rhythm and keep the beat. God bless all of you. Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.